We have arrived to the last video of this series, where we are going to finish up the Korchnoi variation of the classical main line. We're going to start off from the position up on the board, and we have already looked at the sidelines leading up to this position, and also we checked out what happens if white castles to the short side. We have one more thing to take a look at, and that is what happens if white decides to castle to the long side. It might seem to be a logical decision, because after the move h5, white might be inclined to try to exploit that weakness on the king side, though it's going to turn out that white does not have any good ways to really attack black's king, and actually white's king on the queen side might get into some kind of a trouble later on. So let's see how we're gonna get there. White's main move in this position is the move bishop e3, though white could try the more timid bishop d2. I think bishop on e3 is just gonna be much better placed in all of the lines, and also there is a concrete reason why bishop e3 is the move that is played by all the players. We're gonna continue the very same way as we would against bishop e3, and that is to play the move knight d7, and our plan is knight f8, bishop e6 and b5. So white castles long. We continue with our plan with knight f8. Once again, white does not have any good ways to exploit our weakness on h5. We're gonna check out a few tries for white with the bishop being on e3, but the main try for white is actually to try to gain more space in the center and to try to restrict black's pieces. Hence the main plan is something among the lines king b1, c4, knight c3 for white. So after the move king b1, we go bishop e6, and on c4, there's a very typical break, which always going to be a question if it works out or not, and that is the move b5. If it works out for black, black is usually doing great. White's king might get under lots of pressure, and it turns out that here, with the bishop being on d2, this is just a great version for black. First of all, if white takes on b5, we take it back, and on bishop b5, we have sacrificed the pawn. But after the move rook e7, followed up by rook c7 and rook b8, black gets such a nice counterplay against white's king that it's kind of obvious that white is the one who has to be very careful. The position is unclear, but practically I would always pick black in such a situation. If we just go back, there is a critical idea what we have to be aware of, and that is, instead of taking on b5, white might try a counter pawn sacrifice with d5, c takes d5 and c5. Now white is claiming that the bishops on d6 and e6 are much worse than in the previous line, and also the knight might have a nice spot on d4, and with that white might be good in the long run. Though it turns out that after the move rook c8, c5 is immediately hanging. Keep in mind that with the bishop on e3, the pawn would not be hanging. And here, if white protects the pawn with b4, we can already blow up white's king side, and with that put tremendous pressure on white's king. I believe that black has a very nice play, and once again, white is in a great danger. So let's just go back, and as mentioned before, white really should play bishop e3 if he wants to castle to the long side. So instead of the move bishop d2, in this position, bishop e3 is the move which should be taken seriously. Now with black, everything is kind of easy because we're just gonna go knight d7, and the plan is, just like beforehand, to play knight f8, bishop e6 and b5. Most of the times, white is gonna castle to the long side, though there is one independent try here, and that is the move knight g3. White is hitting the h5 pawn right away, maybe he is hinting knight f5 as well, asking black how is he going to deal with all those threats. In this position, we have to take a different approach than usual, and we have to remember one very strong move, and that is the move knight b6. White has to be careful. It's very easy to mess up this position with white. Let me just show a few examples how could that happen. So for example, after the move knight takes h5, we would go knight d5. Now we are planning to take on e3 and get back our pawn, and if white decides to protect the pawn with queen d2, white would be losing already on the spot. g6, hitting the knight on h5, which has only one square available, and f5, coming with the idea of f4. And it turns out that there is no way for white to stop that. We are going to win a piece and black is winning. Let's just go back. If white decides to castle to the short side, we can kick out the knight on h5 with bishop g4, and on knight g3, exchanging down a few pieces with bishop g3, h takes g3, knight takes e3, f takes e3, and rook takes e3, getting back our pawn, also trying to put some pressure on the only open file, and also highlighting the fact that white's pawn structure is somewhat weakened. It's clear that white is the one who is fighting for equality here. So let's just go back a few moves, and white is better advised not to take on h5. White could play the move long castle, for example, in this position, but obviously we're gonna follow up with knight d5 once again. Knight takes h5 would be a huge mistake this time around as well. Bishop g4, hitting both the knight and the d1 rook. Bishop e2, only move. We can take on e2, queen e2 and play g6. Knight is kicked out, g3 is the only available square. And on f5, white is once again in a huge trouble. Now white is not going to lose a piece this time around because he has the move c4, but after knight takes e3, f takes e3, f4, knight has only one square once again, that is knight f1, and black takes on e3, the engine claims a winning advantage, and that should not be a surprise looking at white's pieces and also how strong that e3 pawn is. And also important to note that knight e3 is not possible because bishop f4, queen g5 comes with such a strength, and those pins gonna be so strong that black would pick up material eventually. So let's go back. Taking on h5 is not an option for white, but white can try some other moves. If white drops back the bishop to d2, in that case we can follow up with knight f4, knight g2 is in the air, knight d3 is in the air, so bishop f4 is probably the best. But after bishop f4 check, follow it up with queen d5, maybe bishop e6, maybe b5. Black has a very nice position with the pair of bishop, and white is not getting anywhere with his attack against black's king. Now there is one more thing what white can try, and that is to protect the bishop on e3 instead of moving it. So rook d1 would be a possibility here. Now there is a very easy solution for black here, and that is to play knight takes e3, f takes e3, bishop g3, h takes g3, and queen a5 for example, follow it up with bishop g4. I believe black is slightly better due to the fact that his pawn structure is superior, and also white's once again not getting anywhere attacking black's king. Though there was one very nice game which I think it's worth to point out, and it continued in a slightly different manner. Let's just go back, and there black tried to keep up more pieces, and he played the move bishop e6. One of the ideas is that knight h5 could be answered by queen a5, and we are both looking at the h5 knight and the a2 pawn, and also we are ready to play c5 or b5, b4. Black is the one who is attacking. So in the game, white did not take on h5, but rather played king b1, but nonetheless black played the move queen a5, with that defending the pawn on h5. And after the moves a3, rook a d8, and knight e4, black continued with knight e3, f takes e3 and c5 and achieved a very nice position. Black feels a little bit preferable and slightly better. In the game, white played a seemingly very logical move, c4, but it turned out that after c takes d4, c takes d4, there is this nice combination with bishop takes a3, b takes a3 and rook d4, and black is getting such a huge counterplay for the piece that he is doing very well. He's even better. Now the game is not over, and also we are not going to get back our piece right away, but we have some very natural moves coming up next. Rook d8, f5. Also we have a good chance to pick up the a3 pawn and probably eventually the c4 pawn, and with that, even from the material point of view, black should be doing fine. All in all, this position is very easy to play with black, and it's a nightmare for white. Let's just go back once again, and there is one more thing to talk about after the move knight g3, and that is what happens if instead of long castle, white decides to switch up plans and go back for short castle setup. Probably in this position that's the best, though already we can say that white's play is not ideal. So after the move short castle, we can play knight d5, hitting the bishop on e3, and on bishop d2, we can follow it up with h4. And knight e4 seems like a logical continuation. There was one particular game between two strong grandmasters where black played the move h3 right away, and after g3 it turned out that black pieces are a little bit limited, and black would be happy to exchange something on f4, but he cannot do it anymore. So my suggestion is that instead of the move h3, let's play the move bishop f4, and actually it's gonna be a surprising sequence because we are going to deliberately exchange down few pieces, and even then we're gonna see that thanks to the move h4 and possibly later h3 or knight f4, black will have a very nice play on the king side. So what could happen here is after rook e1, bishop d2, queen d2 and bishop f5, we might be forced to exchange down a few more pieces after knight c5, bishop d3, rook e8, queen e8, white also has an intermediate move rook e1, and it might seem that white achieved quite a few things. He got the control over the e file, he managed to exchange down a few pieces, but still it turns out that after the move queen c8, it's a smart move which not only tries to improve the queen over the diagonal h3 c8, but also in some cases it's gonna cover the b7 pawn, which right now was attacked by the knight on c5. Now white can play the move queen takes d3. In this case, we just go b6, and on knight b3, queen d7 is the simplest, with the idea of g5, knight f4, potentially queen d5, and we have no problem whatsoever. Or else, white could play some other moves. For example, here he could retreat to e4, but that does not make too much difference. We can still play queen d7. Here we have an extra idea with rook e8, pinning the knight on e4. Lastly, white could take back on d3 with the knight, and with that he would cover the f4 square, so knight f4 would not be an idea for black anymore. But here we can switch up plans, play the move h3, forcing white to go g3, and after queen f5, turns out that the light squares are very weak around white's king, and once again we do have enough compensation for the somewhat weakened pawn structure, and black is in a perfect shape. Let's go back to the very beginning, and more likely than not, white will opt for the move long castle after bishop e3 instead of the move knight g3. So here, long castle, and probably it's not a surprise, we're gonna play the move knight f8. Now worth mentioning that knight b6 here would be a mistake, because on c4 we do not have any follow-up, and here we are in a little bit of a trouble. We cannot play b5, which could be a potential idea. In many cases we cannot play knight d5, and c5 is a threat, so that's not what we want. So knight f8, and now white has quite a few choices. I believe white's best idea is to play c4, king b1, knight c3, restricting black and hoping that black will not be in time to play b5. And the reason is that other moves are not going to work out that well. Let's take a look at a few examples. So for example, if white plays the move h3, which might be kind of critical or dangerous, but not really something what we have to be afraid of. First of all, when white plays the move g4, most of the times we can have h4 available for us, and with that keeping the position closed on the king side. On the other hand, it's gonna turn out that we do have some play going on against white's king, and it's gonna be surprisingly quick. Black should follow up with bishop e6. Now a2 is hanging, so c4. If white plays g4, that would be possible, and here we have to react one way or another. Probably the best is to include the move bishop d5, attacking the rook, and on the very next move we can go h4, and when white plays c4, we can even put the bishop on f3, and it's not gonna be so easy for white to get rid of it. So g4 is not something to be afraid of. White could start off with the move c4, but here we are ready to play the move b5. Now this is a break which we have seen already, and also we already know that one of the critical tries here for white would be to play the move d5, sacrificing the pawn of his own. And here we can take on d5, and on the move c5, due to the fact that the king is still on c1, not on b1, we do have a very strong reply here, and that is queen a5. The d6 bishop is taboo, because rook c8 would be just too strong if white opens up the c file. Also a2 is hanging, and rook c8 is coming anyways, and black does have a very strong play, and black is much better here. So white cannot do this, but white can try to play c5 in this position. Here we have to drop back the bishop to c7, and on the move king b1 we can continue our attack with a5. In one game white played the move g4, which once again seems logical, though it's not achieving too much. Black played h4, the move which I mentioned, though here even b4 is possible due to the fact that g takes h5 is answered by queen d5, and queen a2 and queen h5 are both ideas for black, and black's king side gonna be surprisingly safe once we play g6, f5 for example on the next moves. But once again, our default reply gonna be h4, just closing down the king side. And here after the moves bishop e4, bishop d5, bishop d5, surprisingly the best reply is c takes d5. Now on queen takes d5, which would be your normal move, knight c3, queen d7, queen f5 comes in time, and black has no time to stop white's d5 ideas, and after that white gonna be just tiny bit better. Hence, we cannot play c takes d5 in this position. It might look strange, and also it might look like the c5 pawn is a strong passed pawn. On the other hand, that pawn is not going anywhere. we always gonna have a nice blockading square on c6 for the knight in the long run, and also our pawns are ready to make some advance on the queen side, and with that putting some pressure on white's king, while once again white's attack is not going anywhere. If we just play some natural moves from here on, for example white plays rook g1 with the idea of g5, we continue with b4, and on g5 we should not panic, we're just gonna leave that pawn on g5 as it is, and here for example we can play knight g6, and already black is taking over the initiative. Turns out that white just weakened up some of his pawns on the king side, and he still does not have any attack going on, and black's position is already better. There is one similar idea to mention, and that is if white plays the move bishop f5 instead of the move bishop e4, now we're just gonna go bishop d5, and on rook g1 there was a game played to this position, but black should have played the move b4. And on the move g5, we should just not panic, and g6 would have been a very strong reaction. If the bishop moves from f5, we would be ready to play f5 ourselves, and if white takes on f6, we can take it back with the queen, and black is ready to once again advance his attack on the queen side, and black is doing very well. So we should go back to the crossroad to move 12, where white could decide to play in a very different manner, and instead of the move h3, he can play some other things as well. For example, knight f4 seems to be a logical try, but here another idea to keep in mind that we can even give up our dark square bishop. We're probably gonna need our light square bishop much more. So bishop f4, and now we can get out our bishop to e6. a2 is hanging, so king b1, and we can play b5. Now g6, a5, a4, queen d5, these are the ideas to keep in mind, and the usual thing is going on. White's attack is non-existent on the king side, while black is really advancing on the other side of the board. The game might continue with the moves rook ag1, a5, c4, but I don't believe that's such a good direction for white, even though it was played in one game. Here we can take, and on bishop c4, queen d7, and black is just having such a strong grip over the light squares. Bishop d5, knight e6 is coming up next. It makes black's position preferable. Let's just go back, because other than knight f4 and h3, there are still some other tries out there, and for example in this position there were some games with the move knight g3. Here we should continue with g6, protecting the pawn on h5, and after the move knight e4, there are different options available. Black could even play the move f5, giving up the dark square bishop, though here we can even choose to drop back the bishop to e7, because the light square bishop gonna be ready to get to e6 anyways. And probably there is one game worth remembering, and that followed us king b1, f5, knight d2, and bishop e6, h3. Now, this was a weird play from white, because if we just think about it, he played knight g3, knight e4, knight d2, though he achieved that we played g6 and f5, and now it's true that if white could play g4, he might be able to open up some fights against our king, and that was his idea. Though there is nothing to fear, because g4 gonna be a pawn sacrifice, so if we're gonna be ready to take it, we might have a good position. And for that reason, here bishop f6 is the good move. There was one particular game where black played the move b5, and after g4, f takes g4, h takes g4, h takes g4, white played bishop f4, and turned out that this position is dangerous. After bishop g5, bishop e5 followed, and on f6 there was this beautiful move f4 available for white, and turns out that white is just winning. All the files and diagonals are opening up against black's king, and black is nowhere near to defend himself. So let's just go back. b5 was not a good move, and also it's important just to notice that this position is very different from those what we have looked at. Here white is ready to play g4 and open up the position, hence we already have to take some precautions. So the best move here is to play bishop f6, getting ready to transfer our bishop back to g7, and with that making our king extra safe. For example, if white goes g4 now, we are free to take it, and on h takes g4, bishop g4, black is doing fine. Though still there are some tactics out here. For example, if white plays rook ag1, we drop back the bishop to g7, once again king safety first. And here, after the move f3, turns out that white does have some tricks up in his sleeve. If we take on e3, white can take on g4, and once again files are going to start to open up. So we should play the move bishop f3. On knight f3, the e3 bishop is hanging, so we are not afraid of that. But there is the move bishop g5, and here we would be in trouble if it was not for queen takes g5, rook takes g5, bishop h1. But that solves all of our problems. Now we have a bishop and a rook for the queen, but also we do have 3 connected pass pawns on the king side and also 2 pawns from the material point of view. And with all that, black is doing good. White is the one who should be afraid. Now let's just go back to the very beginning to move 12s where white had those choices, and we yet to cover the main idea for white, and that is what happens if white plays either c4, bishop e6, king b1, or king b1, bishop e6, c4. That leads to the same story. Actually, instead of c4, white could try the same ideas what we have seen beforehand, though there are not going to be any surprises. On h3, we would just play b5, and on g4, we play h4, closing down the king side. Now, there was one very nice game with some nice tactical blows, and that followed with rook g1, bishop d5, g5, and here black went for the very straightforward bishop h2. Idea is that if the rook moves away from the g5, then the g5 pawn would be hanging. So rook g4 is the only square, and on bishop f3 there is no other choice but to take on h4. Though white did have some ideas, and that is on f takes g5, now there is the move bishop h7 check, though it turns out that on king h8 there is nothing better for white than to pick up the bishop on f3 with bishop e4 check, but with that giving up an exchange after g takes h4, bishop f3, and even though white has some counterplay with his pair of bishop for the exchange, but he does not even have a pawn for it to show, and black is obviously doing better here. Let's just go back a few moves, and instead of h3, white could try the move knight g3, for example, and same story as beforehand, we're just gonna go g6, and on knight e4, we can even play bishop e7, or play the move b5 and follow it up with a5, a4, and with that have a nice play. If white rather plays the move c4 to stop b5, in that case, we're just gonna play rook c8 and play b5 anyways on the very next move. So for example, knight e4, b5, knight d6, queen d6, and on rook d2, black is ready to take on c4 and once again get a nice creep over the light squares, and with that equalizing on the spot. So if we go back, white really should try to restrict black and play in a more straightforward move order, and that is to play the move c4 on bishop e6. And here black is not in time to play b5 right away. And here black is not in time to play the move b5. If we were to play b5 anyways, white would play the move d5, and that's a theme what we already seen. If white takes on b5, actually black would be fine. We can take back, and on bishop b5 we can play rook e7 or bishop d7. In both cases we can have a very nice counterplay against white's king with the open files. So white can play d5 here, and that's the problem. We have to take it, and here white sacrifices the pawn with c5, and turns out that black is not in time to generate enough counterplay, and black's bishops now on e6 and d6 are not going to be that great, and white will have a nice play with his active position, and suddenly his piece is gonna be well placed. So let's just go back. Instead of the move b5, we have to make a preparatory move, and that's gonna be the move rook c8. And the idea is pretty simple. Given one more move, we would be ready to play b5. So white has to deal with that, and the way how he can do that is to play the move knight c3. Though once again, there are some other directions for white available here. So if white plays h3, actually that would not really stop us from going b5. So after b5, c5, bishop c7, black has no problem whatsoever. The game might continue with g4. Here bishop d5 comes with a tempi, and on rook hg1, actually there are multiple options. We can play the usual h4, which is perfectly fine, though even h takes g4 in this position would be sufficient for obtain an unclear position. After h takes g4, we can follow up with b4, and surprisingly, there is not much what white can do on the king side once again. We have g6 if needed, and white will have a hard time to put pressure on the h file due to the fact that his rooks are restricted. So instead of the move h3 few moves beforehand, actually white should play the move knight c3, and that is the most frequent reply here on rook c8. And the idea is pretty straightforward. Now if black was to play the move b5, which is our original idea, here white would be ready to take with the bishop, and probably this is a better version for him than the previous ones to pick up the pawn, and black will struggle to get enough counterplay. But we do have a very nice other familiar idea available for us, and that is to play the move knight g6. Now that's a pawn sacrifice, but it's not something what white really should accept, because after bishop g6, fg, queen g6, queen d7 is going to be a very strong move. Bishop f5 is a threat, bishop c4 is a threat. Probably the best bet for white is to play the move queen h5, and turns out that here we don't even have to pick up the exchange, which would lead to a better position for black for sure. But after bishop c4, with the pair of bishop and with all the weaknesses on the light squares and with the upcoming attack on the queen side, actually black's advantage is even bigger than it would be if we just picked up the mere exchange. So white really should not take on g6, though if he does not do that, then question what he's going to do. On knight e4, we are ready to play b5, and on knight c5, bishop takes c4, bishop takes c4, b takes c4, queen takes c4, knight e7 gonna lead to a knight's position because the knight's gonna arrive to d5. White's main try, instead of the moves bishop g6 and knight e4, is the move h3 once again. But here we are ready to play b5, everything is well timed now, and here white probably should take on b5. Now on c5, actually it's important to include the move b4. If we were to play bishop e7, for example, then d5 might be unpleasant, but if we include the move b4, turns out that we are doing very well. The knight has to retreat somewhere, and on knight e2, we are ready to go back with the bishop pretty much anywhere, and white does not have the d5 break, and with that, black doesn't have anything to be afraid of. So once again, white probably gonna take on b5, and here we could continue in our usual manner, taking on b5 and playing rook e7, and having some nice compensation for the pawn. The inclusion of the moves h3 and knight g6 definitely favors black compared to the previous position where I said that probably we don't have enough compensation. But actually we do have another option which I like quite a lot, and that is, instead of taking back on b5, we can even play the move knight e7. The idea is that we're just going to sacrifice the same pawn, but in a tiny bit different way, and white will never have the option to push through with d5. We will be able to blockade that pawn, and with that we're going to guarantee that our bishop's going to be very strong, while white's bishop might be not that strong after all. So for example, after b takes c6, we can play knight d5. We are not rushing to take back the pawn on c6. It's going to happen eventually, and here I believe black has a nice compensation. We're gonna take back on c6 sooner or later, and once that happens, we're just gonna try to put pressure on white's king with some logical moves, somehow getting the rook to b8, and all of our pieces gonna lurk around white's king. Overall, I would say against long castle, this idea of playing knight d7, knight f8, bishop e6 and b5, even if it comes with a pawn sacrifice, it's a very strong idea. Practically speaking, very easy to play with black, and I would not be that happy on the white side of the board if my king comes under such pressure. Even though it might look like our h5 pawn creates a weakness on the king side, but turns out that there's never gonna be a real way for white to attack black's king. And that's why, practically speaking, I believe short castle might be more dangerous than long castle. But there as well, black is doing fine, as we have seen in the previous video.